Hello and welcome back to the Women's Football Chat. Today we are going to talk about Manchester United women and the impact of the Sir Jim Ratcliffe takeover. So obviously a lot has been spoken about in the last few months regarding Sir Jim Ratcliffe's takeover and the INEOS takeover, not entire takeover but percentage bought of the Manchester United team, club, and of course with that comes the women's side. Today we're going to talk about the impacts on the women's team, including a potential change of future stadium and some comments regarding the playing team, and of course we're going to talk about Marc Skinner and what the future holds for him. So let's talk about Ratcliffe. So recently he spoke to the press and quite a few interesting comments were made. He was asked most of the questions were of course aimed at the men's side, which is understandable, but there were a few questions aimed at the women's team. But I think first let's talk about the problems that Manchester United women have had in the last few years. Obviously the club was founded in 2018. Since then there have been many problems under the Glazers, haven't there?
Yeah, and I mean, it's an interesting thing to see the men's side obviously have moaned and groaned so much about the Glazers, but from the women's team, from the women's team point of view, they've had the same issues. It's that lack of investment. It's that kind of overall, you sum it up kind of as a lack of care towards growing their women's team. You look at some of the other teams in the Premier League, Chelsea, Arsenal, City have given their women's team attention and time and put some effort into it. It feels like under the Glazers, United have not done that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you look at some of the issues over the last few years, the club missed out on huge signings due to difficulties with actually just funneling down the finances, which seems ridiculous, but that was literally what happened over the summer. The first bit was that they couldn't renew Russo's contract because when they wanted to do negotiations, the money just wasn't there. They didn't get permission from the higher-ups, and that's a huge organisational issue at the club, and it led eventually to her being able to leave on a free, which is, I would say, a fundamental issue when you're allowing one of your best players to leave your women's side simply due to an error in accounting almost. Just that permission. Administrative things shouldn't impact the playing squad. And we saw the same with United over the summer. They spent ages trying to find a replacement for Russo. They didn't sign one. Eventually they were able to get Jose Ferreira, but that came later in the window. And there's so many opportunities they could have had to go and get a potentially better player. And we've seen Jose hasn't exactly been the right fit at Manchester United. So I don't think there's been enough care and attention to that administration or administrative errors. I also think there's been a problem with the scouting. I don't think their recruitment has been incredible over the last few years, and they've had various other issues. I mean, you look at the fact that there's been, as we say, that lack of clarity regarding budget and strategy. We also saw their assistant manager leave, and that's left them with a real shortage of high quality coaching because Martin Ho left. That was their best coach, and he's gone. And it's things like that. I mean, they lost their physio for a while to the men's team. They've had so many injuries this season, possibly as a consequence, and that's obviously impacted the side, especially since the investment isn't coming in backups and in that squad depth. And we've seen Marc Skinner this season speak about that squad depth because they had, I'm trying to think now who it was that went out injured. They had their backup left back, but the name escapes me now. I want to say Hannah George, but I might be getting that wrong, so apologies if I am. Out with an ACL injury this season, and it's not really a replacement. A replacement hasn't really come in the door. And you look at other clubs. Man City had an injury to Jill Roord. They went and signed Laura Blinkeld over £200,000. Chelsea had injuries to Millie Bright and Sam Kerr. In came Natalie Bjorn and Myra Ramirez. For at the time a world record transfer fee. Now that's a huge difference in investment, and I could understand in that regard Marc Skinner's gripes with the ownership.
Yeah, and I'm not Marc Skinner's number one fan, but I feel from this scenario, and I feel like all the moaning and groaning he does is actually more from a supporter's point of view.
Yeah,
he makes the same complaints and he brings up the same arguments that the fans do, and I think that says a lot about where Skinner stands or how happy he is with what he's been given to use. But as you say, it's really poor investment across the board, because scouting, all of that has had no investment, and even when they've got really good staff in the physios, they get nabbed whenever the first team need them, and now they're having to bring in the England physio on a temporary basis to the end of the season.
Yeah.
It's incredible. It stuns me, to be honest. It absolutely stuns me. But yeah, it is a clear lack of investment, and I think that is a massive reason you can put down to maybe their struggles or failures this year, because they can't keep up with City, Arsenal or Chelsea because that exact spending you spoke about. United won't go out and break the world record transfer fee to sign a striker because there are other ones get injured.
Yeah, so there's clearly a big problem there. Now, INEOS have said they'll review these processes, and I do think that that's quite a good thing to hear, that INEOS are going to look back and learn from the mistakes that Glazers have made. They're not going to neglect that women's team in the same way the Glazers have. I mean, the fact they didn't even set one up until 2018 speaks volumes of the amount of care and attention that has gone into that women's game. It took so long for United even to set a team up, and then when they did, it feels like a bit of a half-assed attempt.
I think the pandemic,
but then they came second last year, so it's difficult, isn't it? So they have had some success. FA Cup finalists last year, second place in the WSL. They got to the Champions League for the first time this season. I think a lot of people would say that Marc Skinner's tenure has actually been quite successful. This is his third season in charge. Within 2 seasons, they were challenging for the WSL title. I think the biggest question mark around this third season is why they're not up there again, why they were knocked out of Europe so early, and why they just don't seem to be... they're out of the Women's League Cup. They don't seem to be competing on any of these fronts, and I think that does raise a huge question around Skinner. And INEOS have said they will review whether Marc Skinner will continue with the side next season. And we've spoken at length about Skinner, so I don't think there's too much to touch on today. I think there's pros and cons to keeping him. I think if you are going to keep him, you've got to invest in the squad, because if not, I don't really... it's like going into a gunfight with a spoon. It's very difficult when you've not got that backing, and I think they could do with that. However, if someone better than Marc Skinner becomes available, I think it's a smart investment to go and look at the options, explore who is out there, who is interested. So, going to be very interesting. Now, a couple of other things that have been spoken about. It's long been known, actually, that the women's side have very poor facilities. The facilities aren't great. The men's side facilities aren't great either. They're about 20 years outdated, but that's a separate issue. And, well, it does seem like the men's side are going to get an upgrade. The women's side may well just get the men's side stuff. Now, while this isn't perfect, it's certainly something. Now, I think, obviously, we want bespoke facilities for female players and for the female fans and stuff like that. We want stadiums that are suited to the women's game. However, I don't necessarily think it's a negative to use these facilities. And what INEOS and, Jim Ratcliffe in the interview said was, speaking about Old Trafford, potentially building a new stadium for Manchester United, but keeping Old Trafford and using it for the women's game and for youth sides. Maybe decreasing the capacity a little, modernising it a little bit, but overall keeping Old Trafford, using it for the women's side. Now, I think this is quite a good idea. I think that while it would be nice to have a separate ground and I love, great facilities for the women's game, I understand why that outlay just isn't there right now, especially at the start of his tenure. But to make these promises that there will be attention paid, because the women's side currently play at the Leigh Sports Village. Now, while that is an okay stadium, it's not one of the biggest in the WSL. No. I think for me, a club of United side could definitely play at a bigger stadium, as could like Arsenal. And I think as the game develops and grows, and as the men's game develops and becomes more and more expensive and unaffordable, I think the women's game will start to fill that gap for a lot of fans who want to watch high-level football but perhaps can't afford to watch the Premier League. And I think they need bigger grounds, these women's teams. So I think while it's not perfect, moving the women's side into Old Trafford, maybe in 5-10 years' time, it's not going to be immediate, but eventually is a nice gesture, at least something positive from Ratcliffe.
Yeah, and obviously the trade facilities, the ground need a bit of work. We've seen concrete falling from Old Trafford, and we've seen the trade facility, the hygiene rating in the canteen on the floor.
Yeah, we're going to give the women's facilities, but don't go to the canteen.
Yeah, don't go to the canteen, the stadium's falling apart. But you'll be right. But yeah, it's a step in the right direction, really. Obviously, they do need a bit of touch-ups, but that though the facilities not being great, I don't think reflects just the women's team. I think it reflects Man United as a whole. The fact that Old Trafford is falling down. But yeah, Ratcliffe clearly wants to make some positive steps. He wants to, and you hope this all comes to fruition. You hope it isn't just a PR stunt to make everyone like him again. Not again, but to everyone to like him and be positive.
Yeah.
But if he's true to his word and he does make the changes he's going to make and does stand by his comments, then I think it's the only way is up for the women's side.
The thing I will say about Sir Jim Ratcliffe is that he is a Manchester United fan. That is a fact. He does love the club, and I do think he comes in as part owner, controlling owner with a minority stake. Very confusing situation. But I think he comes in as someone who cares more about the passion. He's very passionate about it. He cares more about the club, about the project, than he does about turning profit. And that's going to be the huge difference. And I think that comes hand in hand with growing the women's game. Because at the same time, he's not an idiot. He will realise the growth and the potential of women's football, and I think he'll spot a gap in the market there because there's not many people, not enough people investing in the women's side. And right now, as we're about to be taken over by NewCo, the WSL and the Women's Championship, we're at a real flux moment where the women's game could really grow very quickly and expand very fast. So I think there's a huge opportunity here, and I think he'll notice that, Jim Ratcliffe, and invest accordingly, because there is an opportunity there. United are already one of the best sides in the game. A little bit more investment, and there's no reason why they can't challenge the likes of Chelsea, City and Arsenal. There's no reason why they couldn't be in the title fight next season. And that does, of course, open up questions about Marc Skinner. Will he stay? Will he go? But ultimately, if it's a good enough side, as we've seen with the likes of Spain in recent months, it doesn't really matter who the manager is. Now, of course, it has an impact. But Skinner's good enough, you would say, to get them a title if they've got a good enough squad.
It's a tough one, I think, because if you keep him, you've got to please him. That much has been proven, because because last year, no complaints. This year, as soon as things start looking south, he starts putting the blame on others, and I think it's justified blame, but that's the way it is, isn't it? You're doing well, you don't mention it. You're doing badly, you start bringing out more and more reasons.
Well, it was quite intriguing for him to attack his own owners in that manner, and because, well, either he is kind of clinging on for his job, making excuses, or he's genuinely frustrated and wants to air those concerns. Either way, it's not going to put him in the best of positions with the Glazers, but in some respects, I have respect for him coming out and talking so candidly.
I think the other problem is, and someone put this on the poll, or on the polls a couple of days ago, so shout out to you, whoever you are, but it's, they said that the fans had already sacked Skinner, and it was up to the board now, which is, I think that is the major problem if Skinner stays, is that you have to convince the fans it's the right decision. Because I think a lot of fans have already turned their backs on Skinner.
I think right now, though, it's a very loud minority. Now, when I say minority, it's not like a small 10%. I still think it's a large group of fans, but I don't think the whole fan base is against Marc Skinner just yet. I do think there are some people that aren't huge fans of him. I think he can come across. I think he can come across as quite rude and abrasive in his interviews. I don't think he's particularly likable. I have to say I'm not his biggest fan. I can understand why a lot of people aren't his biggest fan. I don't think he's a bad manager, and I think that's reflected in his results. He took a side founded only 6-7 years ago, and they finished up second in the WSL last season. They were runners-up in the Women's FA Cup. They got to the Champions League qualification round. Now, that's no small feat, and would they have done the same without him? Possibly. But that doesn't pay disrespect or disregard to his accomplishments to say that they would have done it without him. He was still there when they did it.
Yeah, I think the big problem is then you compare this season to last season. They're already out of the League Cup. They're still in the FA Cup quarters, to be fair. They were knocked out of the Champions League qualification rounds, and they are fourth in the league, joint on points with a Liverpool side who you wouldn't really say are part of that top lot in the league. And
well, they have invested a lot more this season, Liverpool, to be fair, and Matt Beards is a good manager.
United are already outside of Europe. They could find themselves drop into fifth, and even to sixth with teams like Tottenham and Villa coming through. So they've got to be careful towards the end of the season that for Skinner they don't end up dropping too far down.
I very much agree with you. I think that there are some genuine concerns about Skinner. I also think that a lot of the problems this season can be explained by other things. It very much depends whether you blame Skinner for everything this season or whether you trust in his word. There are extraneous circumstances. They lost their best player, Alessia Russo. That is a fact. And was Heysay the best replacement? Potentially not. They're not even using her as a striker anymore because she hasn't been able to find the back of the net consistently. I think that shows, that's one of many problems that they've had this season. They've had injuries, loads of different things. You could also talk about Skinner's tactics, though. You could say he's too defensive. You could say he's not defensive enough at times. But also, I think of games this season, probably the most notable loss, or most recent, was that 3-0 loss to Arsenal. Now, I don't know what Skinner can do to tell his players not to kick it into the opposition, and I think that's a huge problem.
And then you look at the draw to West Ham last weekend was a really poor result. Going 1-0 up in the first couple of minutes, and then conceding the equaliser in the last couple. And I think, but there's also like team selection. We've seen Paris, we've seen Rachel Williams, we've seen Jesus Pereira, we've seen Mallard. So many different players have played in those attacking positions. We haven't even seen Miyazawa.
Well, and the other, she's been injured for a large portion of the season with a fractured ankle. I think you can also question whether the players are playing for Skinner anymore. So I think there's a lot to talk. It's a very difficult conversation. It's not as simple as, Skinner. United have been bad this season. It's Skinner's fault. Get him out. It's also not as simple as United have been bad this season. None of it's to blame on Skinner.
Yeah.
It's a very difficult thing. The question I would ask, though, to a lot of United fans who are saying we want Skinner out, and we heard it chanted at the Chelsea game when we were there, is that's all right and good, but who comes in? Because I don't see an alternative right now. There's probably some options out there if you can pry. But I don't see many upgrades right this second.
And if you sack your manager now, you're getting into a messy market. Because obviously you've got Chelsea who are looking for a new manager. And realistically, if they're going to take someone off another team, then that team's going to need a manager. There's been a few things said about Idaval and what's going on there at Arsenal. Because I saw some things saying they wanted that if Idaval goes, they've got a couple of replacements lined up. And I was like, are they Arsenal fans already thinking about that?
Well, to be fair, I wouldn't be surprised if Idaval's eyeing an improved job. The Barcelona job could be on the market. He's on the market this summer. We know Godaldes leaving. I don't believe they've announced a replacement, though I might be wrong on that one. Lyon, if Sonia Bonpastor does go on to join Chelsea, that's a great job for Jonas Idaval. So
feels like
it's going to be a very good market this
Exactly.
season.
For United, though, it's not something you want to get involved in because out of all the managers we just mentioned, they're choosing Chelsea, then they're choosing Arsenal. They're choosing Barcelona, then they're choosing Chelsea, then they're choosing Arsenal. Man United are fourth on the pecking order there. Yeah. You're not getting a great manager at that point.
Wow.
You're not getting a world-class manager.
There's 4 world-class managers in the world. There's loads of world-class managers.
Emma Hayes is one, she's off to America. Garaldes is 2, but he'll pick Chelsea.
The big question is Laura Harvey, if all else... if she's interested in the United job, of course. So there's a lot of questions. I think City are the only side that are settled at the moment. They've just announced that Graham Taylor's got a new contract to 2027. I think that does show the...
It makes sense.
Well, they've played very well.
They're on for the treble this year.
They could win the title. So, going to be very interesting to see how this pans out. Back to the topic, though, because we've spoken a lot about a lot of different things. Do you think that the Ratcliffe takeover is a positive thing for United?
I think it's absolutely huge. The Glazers showed they did not care. Ratcliffe has already come in, and if he sticks to what he said, it feels like we're going to see a lot of changes, a lot of improvements into the women's side. And at that point, in a couple of years' time, we could see them in the fight with the top 3. And that would be really good to see. More competition, more competitive title fight. Yeah. Who says no?
Well, with Liverpool and Tottenham investing as well, are we getting the traditional big 6 in the WSL as well?
Villa can actually work out and play football.
Well, exactly. There's so many teams that are going to compete for so little spots. The WSL is so stacked, and that's something that we don't have in any other league.
Look, go watch last week's video. Was it last week where we talked about the structure of the WSL? New code coming in?
Maybe. Can't remember. Anyway, go watch all our videos. They're great. Anyway, if I've remembered, that video will be linked in the end screen. I think that's everything for the topic today. Anything else to touch on?
I think if I'm a United fan, though, I'd get excited.
Okay, there we go. If you want to watch our last video or a random video, click here to keep watching us. We're covering Harry's face right now, which is a win for all of us. Thank you guys very, very much for watching today, and make sure to leave a comment below. We will see you next time.
See ya.